We both know that playing Commander is great, but playing 2 games of Commander is even better. A game can go long pretty easily, but I've got a few tips here to help speed up games while keeping the fun of Commander intact. Take a look. My first tip starts with the very start of the game. After we shuffle our deck up to get our opening hand, we offer our deck to somebody to cut the deck. And we do that to be really polite, mostly, because we're trying to make sure other players know we're not stacking the deck, we're not cheating, so go ahead and cut the deck. Let's just get a game in. And cutting the deck is normally used in competitive play to stop some of those things from actually happening because players actually do cheat or try to stack their deck. But we're playing Commander here. We're playing a social format. It's a game that we play for fun with each other. Cutting the deck isn't necessary unless you have a player in your group that's going to cheat. But then the real problem there is the player who's going to cheat. It's not going to be the actual cutting the deck that's the problem. I know that offering a deck to somebody else to cut is polite, but really, if you're playing with the same group of players, we're just doing it to show our play group that we're not cheating. But if you guys have played together for a while, don't they already know that? Or shouldn't they? You can eliminate a lot of time from not cutting decks. And I know this sounds like really silly because cutting decks doesn't feel like that much of a time waste. But when every player needs to cut their deck, you've got 4 players in the game, and they're going to do it multiple times just to start the game because you're probably going to take your mulligan as well and then cut the deck afterwards. Just that time alone is some time, not a full game of Commanders worth of time, but it's some time. But then it's every other time after that when you've rampant growth and then you offer your deck to somebody to cut afterwards. That's time wasted. Just shuffle your deck and let's move on, you know? I know it's not that big of a deal. It's just over the course of one game with the amount of players that are shuffling the deck, that time racks up. And over the course of many games, you're going to lose time playing Commander because you're cutting decks. Cutting the deck is such a simple thing, but it costs time because players knock over decks on accident or they mishandle cards, right? Or we're joking around because we're just going to cut one card or whatever. Just cutting the deck. It's not worth it. It's a waste of time, I promise you. If you've got a player that you're worried about cheating and so you keep cutting the deck of the game, maybe cut the player. Just by 2 pennies. The official rules in Commander for mulliganing. Mulliganing? Mulliganing is not a word. The official rule in Commander for mulliganing is to draw 7 cards and then either keep that hand or mulligan that hand and draw another set of 7. You get 1 for free. But after that, you have to mulligan down to 6 cards for your second mulligan and decide if you're going to keep that hand. And if you don't want that hand, then you mulligan again, but you go down to 5 and you go all the way down until you're out of cards in your hand. Whatever you want to do based on the playable hand. And this has been the official rule for quite a while now. And yeah, it's the official rule, but this mulligan rule is just another way to stop players from taking advantage of the game or abusing the mulligan system to look for a perfect hand to play the game. And honestly, this mulligan rule slows down the game a bunch too. The worst thing that can happen in a game of Commander, honestly, for every player is one player who has to mulligan down to 6 or 5 cards. It feels awful as that player to have that hand. And it feels bad for your opponents because they don't want you to have a 5-card hand. They want you to play a game with them. They don't want you to have no cards or less cards. They're not sitting there going, this game's over. That's not how we play Commander. It's a social format. We're here to play together and have fun. But even if that doesn't happen, that's the worst thing. And we all mulligan once for free. We're all shuffling the deck way more times than we need to try to find a playable hand. And maybe we just need to find a new rule for mulligan that's going to make games start faster than shuffling our deck a whole bunch of times to get that second hand that might be playable. I've been a part of multiple play groups for Commander over the last 10 years, in multiple states even. And in each of those play groups, we had different rules for mulligan. My favorite mulligan rule is instead of drawing 7 cards for opening hand, you draw 10. But you pick 3 cards that you're going to get rid of. They go to the bottom of your deck. And you keep a 7-card hand. And the mulligan rule for this also applies just like the regular mulligan rule. If you don't like your opening 10, you shuffle all of them and you draw your first set again of 10 for free. And then you put 3 down underneath it. And really what the point of this mulligan is that you can get your 3rd land or you can get rid of 2 extra lands in your hand. I'm going to go ahead and make a wager that 90% of Commander decks are looking to start a game with 3 lands in their hand. If this is true for you, let me know in the comments, because I know it's true for me and for my play group. We're all looking for 3 lands in our hand in order to play this hand. It really doesn't matter after that. The best hands are the ones that have the 3 lands and a ramp piece and a draw piece. But outside of that, I just want 3 lands. I want to play the game. And it really sucks when you've got 2 lands in your hand and you really wish you had a third one for your opening hand. And that's where you draw 3 extra cards and just keep that 1 extra land, put your hand and put 3 cards underneath. You're good to go. And you're done. You don't have to worry about shuffling up and finding a new hand of 7. Or maybe you have a hand with 6 lands in it. Man, that's too many. You don't have any spells to cast. Well, you just draw those 3 extra cards and keep whatever they are and put 3 lands on the bottom of your deck because now you have a 3-land hand, and then the other 4 cards are cards that you can play. This 10-card mulligan rule is my favorite mulligan rule because usually you're mulliganing 0 times. You're keeping your opening hand and just picking 3 cards and putting them to the bottom. It works out really well. Now, the flip side argument here is that this mulligan is very abusable. You're looking at 10 cards, and if you've got players who are going to abuse the system, they're the problem, not the mulligan. So maybe have a conversation with that player or cut that player, because if you've got a player who's just looking to find the opening Soul Ring or the opening 2-card combo, and they're just going to mulligan forever until they find it, that's not how this is supposed to work. We're here to play together. We're here to have fun together. We're not here to abuse a system to try to make games start faster by winning more games to find the 2-card combo in our opening hand every time. That makes sense, right? Okay, conversations with your group about what's a fun and kind way to play with each other. Which, I mean, if we're all adults here, which I know we're not all adults, there are kids who play Commander, but if you're playing with a group of adults, come on. Really? We shouldn't have to have conversations like that. Anyways, there are other mulligan rules to explore that might not be as abusable as the 10-card mulligan. But the main point here is to try to get more games started faster, which is going to let you play more games on average because you're not wasting time shuffling your deck so many times just to start the game. The other mulligans I've seen that are less abusable than the 10-card mulligan is it's just the regular mulligan rules, except you never go down in cards. So you always have a 7-card hand, but you can mulligan as many times as you need to get a playable hand. And though this is abusable for the players who are going to mulligan like 18 times until they find the 2-card combo in their deck, you're not playing with those players anyways. Trust me. You're not going to wait for that person to shuffle 18 times. It's not going to happen, okay? But giving somebody a full hand of cards to start the game is way more fun of a game of Commander than to have them go down to 5 cards in hand and they're just out of the game kind of at the start of the game. Especially if they're going last in turn order. Holy crap. That's like brutal. Another one I've seen is that you get 1 free mulligan, just like regular mulligan rules. But if you have Soul Ring in that opening hand, instead that goes to the bottom of your deck and you replace it with the top card of your deck. So it allows you to do a regular mulligan style rule, but you don't have a player who's just mulliganing to find the turn 1 Soul Ring because that just takes the game off the rails for that player. But the problem here is not the player even, it's Soul Ring. And so we could solve all of this by just not having Soul Ring in Commander. And I know I'm one of those people. I think Soul Ring ought not to be in the game. I think the card's too crazy. I know it's an iconic card and all that, and iconic cards are cool. But turn 1 Soul Rings, they swing games so hard. I think the card is too good, but that's another video. We'll talk about that another time. And the last mulligan rule that I really like is actually from the Pokemon trading card game. You do regular mulligan rules, but every time that you mulligan the additional time, your opponents get to draw an extra card instead of you losing a card in your hand. So you're always drawing a hand of 7, but every time after the free mulligan, you give your opponents an extra card in their hand. And now everyone's happy. I get to start with my hand of 7, and my opponents have extra cards, so they're happy to get something for all the time that they waited for you to shuffle your deck multiple times. I'm not saying any one of these is the best and ought to be the new rule. I'm not advocating to Wizards of the Coast to change things up. I understand why we have the mulligan rules we have, but you are your own play group. You are not doing the official tournament rules of Commander. Give one of these mulligan change-ups a try and see how much time it saves. Just give it a shot. You can always go back to what you had before. There's 3 more tips here on the way, but I didn't want you to forget to punch your loyalty card by hitting the like button. And interestingly enough, when you fill your punch card, it now transforms. And on the backside, there's another punch card. Imagine this scenario. You're 10 minutes into a combat step. You've let the defending player know 3 times now how much damage they're going to take after blocks. You move to the damage step and you adjust life totals, but then the defending player notices that they're at 2 life left. It's now the second main phase of your turn when the defending player lets you know that they'd like to go back to the combat step and swords to plowshares your commander before damage to save themselves 10 damage. Do you let this happen? I know this is a small take back potentially, because I've heard stories of players who have let other players take back an action from a turn ago, and they rewind everything for a whole turn to get that action and to optimize that one play. How far do you let players do this? And where's the line? How much can players do to take back things? Takebacks are a great way to help players learn the game. And I'm a big advocate of allowing players to do things over that they might have messed up and get things fixed. But my rule of thumb when it comes to takebacks is if you do any action that reveals more information to any player in the game, you can no longer do a takeback before that moment. For example, in that same combat step example I gave, if after combat I'm allowed to scry one because of some random card effect, once I saw the card on the top of my deck, no more takebacks because I know what the top card is. I've got more information and it affects how I'm going to play the game knowing what the card is on top of my deck. But takebacks, no matter how big or small, take a lot of time away from a game. You're rewinding the game to do something over again, and it doesn't just affect the player who's doing the takeback. It affects every player in the game. It's going to change up whole new lines of thinking and plans players have to do that takeback. More than anything else on this list, takebacks slow the game down a ton. And so do you eliminate takebacks altogether to gain back a whole bunch of time in your games? Or do you allow some takebacks? Or do you allow all takebacks so that every player has the feel good of making the best plays all the time, always? That's up to you and your playgroup. Y'all get to decide what you want to do with that. But I do think that it's worth considering and having a conversation with your playgroup to say, hey, we're only going to allow takebacks up to this point or this far from the turn or action or phase. Or we're only going to allow takebacks if it's something that a new player is doing. And we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they don't know what they're doing. And so we're going to help them out to learn the game. As you and your playgroup play longer and for more time, I really think it's better for all of you to tighten up how much takebacks you take, because making mistakes also teaches you something. It's not just the optimized plays that allow you to learn something. It's also the things that you do that cause a problem for you that you're going to learn and be like, I don't want to do that again. You'll remember that for the next time. And that's a good thing. One thing I've been thinking a lot about lately is ways to add something to Commander that gives the player who goes last in turn order a leg up in the game. Because statistically, that player is the most likely to lose the game of Commander. And that's just how it's always been in Commander since it began. The last player has the least amount of resources, and it's not just least between two players, it's least between four players. And so you're way behind all the other players in the game. One idea I've been thinking about doing is adding a thing called a take back token to Commander, where you give that token to the player who goes last in turn order, and they're allowed to cash in that token to redo something that they did in the game. And obviously with limit, you can't go back more than a turn, or you can't go back more than a phase. Up to your playgroup, you guys can decide. But they use a token and say, I'm going to cash this in and redo this thing that I forgot or didn't do or wanted to do. It lets that last player in the game optimize one action, and that might be just enough resources or leg up to get them caught up in the game compared to the other players. And I even want to go as far as to say maybe that take back token is something that you cash in by giving it to another player. So now that last player in the game can make a friend, right? Or make a deal at least with somebody else in the game to give the last player in the game a little bit more of a leg up. And now that other player who has the take back token can cash it in themselves, and they can optimize one of their actions or redo an action. And so it adds another element to Commander of things for people to do to try to make things better, but also save time in the game, because we don't allow takebacks unless you have the take back token, right? Something like that. It's something really small in the game, and it doesn't matter if you're going last and never make mistakes ever. If you're a perfect player, you'll never use it. But it is something in the game that helps the last player in the game get a leg up without cashing in mana or cards in their hand or using extra resources. I think it's a fun idea. You can do with it what you want to. It's just something I'm thinking about, but it helps out in this conversation of what you allow for takebacks and what you don't. Because with something like a takeback token, maybe you don't allow takebacks at all in those games. But if you have the takeback token, you can do one takeback. And so now you have to really think through, what am I going to do and what's it going to mean, because I can't take it back. But if I'm last in the game, I can make one mistake. Who knows? Give it a shot. Let me know what you think. I'm going to be experimenting as well to see if this is a fun idea to at least speed the game up a little bit, as well as make the game a little bit better for the last player in turn order. These next two tips are going to feel a little bit counterintuitive, but ultimately they're going to help speed things up because of the clarity that it'll bring for players at the table. There are many phases in a turn of Commander. We hear the first three phases of Commander often: untap, upkeep, and draw. But there's more phases after that, and they matter a ton and allow opponents to interact with the current player's turn just by moving from phases. When you announce the phase of a turn, you're initially going to slow things down because you're going to be talking more than you normally do with your play group. But when you do announce phases, you're cluing every player in on what part of the turn it is and what your intentions are. If you're going to move from main phase to combat step, you're now letting players know, hey, here's what's going on. I'm moving forward. Are you going to do anything about it? And you're serving up a dish to your opponents to say, now's your chance to do something about this because I'm going to change phases and you have a chance to interact in between. There's actually a couple things in Magic that we skip sometimes because we don't announce phases all the time that are really important, especially in multiplayer games. When we move from main phase 1 to combat step, the opponents of the player whose turn it is have an opportunity to cast spells and gain priority to do their own things between phase transitions. It's not race to get to the combat step before somebody says something. We always give players an opportunity to interact with the phase changing because that's the rules of the game. It's not like we say, it's my turn to go to combat and hope nobody says anything before you say that. That's not how it works. You have to give players a chance to respond to phases changing. But in addition, and this is the part we miss a lot in Commander, especially in multiplayer games, is that the priority, the person who gets to take the first action, starts with the current player and then goes in player turn order for who gets it next. So for example, if I'm the current player and you're the next player in turn order, and I'm going from main phase 1 to the combat step, and I announce I'm swapping a combat phase, I have no actions. I'm not going to do anything while we swap to the next phase. It now goes to you because you're the next player turn order. Do you want to interact with this phase change? And you could decide, yes, I'm going to do an action or an ability or something like that, play a card. Or you could say no, and you pass priority to the next player in turn order, and they get the same option. But what you can't do is do something after you've passed priority if no other action has been done since priority has been passed, right? So for example, if I'm the current player and I pass to combat and give you priority and you say, no, I don't want to cast a spell or do an ability, but you have something you want to do, you're just waiting for the opportune time to do it after somebody else does an action. Well, if the next player in turn order doesn't do anything and then the next player in turn order doesn't do anything and it goes back to the current player, you missed out. That's how it works. You don't get to wait till everyone passed priority and then be like, oh yeah, actually I do want to do this thing. You can't. It's over. It moves to the next step. And it matters for things. You have to imagine if I have a card in play that says no players can cast spells during combat. In that same example, you got to cast your spells before I go to combat, or spells are off for the combat step, and I get to do whatever I want during that combat step with no interaction. But if you pass priority and don't do something because you want to wait for somebody else to cast something and nobody does, you just miss out. But on the flip side, if you do pass priority and the next player in turn order casts a spell because it's their turn to cast one with priority, you can respond to that by casting a spell. That's totally fine because priority goes back around again with the new thing that's in play. It's just a risk to pass priority if you wanted to do something, but you're waiting for the opportune time and then nobody does anything in addition. Then you just miss out. We need to keep that rule intact in Commander because it's a huge rule break if you undercut all the other players in the game by saying, well, I passed priority, but once everyone passes, I'm going to take priority again and just do it. You can't do that. That's not allowed in Commander. You're not allowed to do that. I think most players don't know that this is a rule, but it is a rule in Magic, and so make sure you don't miss out on that and accidentally undercut other players and advantages and stuff like that with that rule missing. But this whole point is about announcing phases, and the reason why is not just those rule things. We're trying to save time, and the way we save time by announcing phases is we're letting everyone know what the next phase is so that if you wanted to do anything, now's the time, because if you don't do it, we're not going back to go do it again after we already passed that phase. If we go from end of combat to main phase 2 and everyone says, yep, we're good, then there's no reason to do a take back then, because we all gave our approval to move to second main phase, right? If you're catching the player who's on their phone quick and they hear, oh, end of combat, they're like, oh, wait a sec. They put their phone down, they're back in the game, right? And they're going to play. Or you have somebody who's not going to do any actions until the end step, so they're tuned out for the whole turn. That's fine. They can be tuned out. But as soon as they hear move to end step, they're like, oh, that's my cue. So it works great for getting players tuned back in and engaged with the game you're playing, which then ultimately speeds up the game because we all know what's happening in the game. And we know when we want to use the actions and abilities and spells or whatever at every part of the game, instead of like missing out on whole phase of the game because we didn't hear it or we didn't know or whatever else. Last call. This is the last tip on the video. And like I said before, it may feel a little bit counterintuitive, but cards nowadays, they've gotten more complicated. There's more lines of text on cards than what feels like can fit on the card sometimes. And all these complicated cards, they're just that. They're complicated. And especially complicated when you put them on a board with 4 players playing the game instead of just 2. A way to speed up the game is to make sure that you read those complicated cards to every player so that every player knows what's happening with that card. Don't assume that your opponents know what the cards are that you're playing. Instead, assume everyone doesn't know and just read everything out, because it's even worse when you have to read that card 2 or 3 times in order to explain the card to the opponents who missed it because you read it later or on different parts of turns and things like that. Card text matters a lot. The card name, the abilities that the card has, those are the main 2 so that people remember the card name and what ability it has. But the power and toughness of a creature, the creature type, any keywords on the card, mana costs, they affect so many other cards in the game that your opponents can use to interact with that card. And like I said before, this is going to slow down your game up front. I promise it's going to take more time to read out all your cards. But I also promise that the more you read your cards early on, the less you have to read them later when you play those cards often, when they come up in games more times, right? When you play with your play group multiple times throughout a year and you're running the same deck or the same cards in certain decks, you no longer have to read them, right? When's the last time you had to read Sakura Tribe Elder to somebody? Most people know what that card does for the most part. And so when you play one, you're good to go, right? But some of your more obscure cards you're going to have to read because we don't use those cards all the time in a common set of commander decks. But if you play that deck a lot, if it shows up at your table a lot and you play that card a lot, you no longer have to read it as often anymore, and that speeds up the game. For example, in my current play group, the cards Woe Strider, Jan Jansen, Oger Kosalem, and Three Tree City are cards that I no longer need to know what they do, and neither does anybody else, because they're played so often. These are not the most common cards in Commander. There are way more popular cards like Craterhoof Behemoth and Rhystic Study that most people know. But these 4 cards we know because they're played pretty much every single time we play Commander. I've heard those cards and their effects many, many, many times. And this happened because we've played against those cards so often and we read the card every time that we play it. And so now we no longer have to read what that card does when it hits the table because we know what it does. And that's great. It helps speed up the game in the long run. And that's not the only benefit of reading your cards, because really what you're doing here is playing your deck more often, which is really good value because you get to learn your deck more. You get to make changes to your deck so that it's more in tune with what you want the deck to do. Your opponents and you get to learn more cards over time so that it speeds up your games over time. And if you spent money on the deck, you get to use a little bit more value out of the stuff that you spend money on. Play your decks more often is a big point here. And it makes a big difference in saving time for your Commander games over the course of a long time with the play group. When I've only got a few hours to play Commander, I want to get in as many fun games as I can. And none of these tips that I shared today are official rules, but I encourage you to try them out and see if it adds more games completed to your Commander session. Thanks so much for stopping by Cardboard Brewing Company. Have a fantastic day.